It started with a sound that doesn't belong in a quiet suburb, the kind of aggressive, rhythmic thumping that rattles your teeth and makes you think the SWAT team is about to breach your living room, sending the cat scrambling and your heart into your throat. It was barely past dawn, the sky outside still bleeding that soft, bruised purple into the horizon, and I was standing in the kitchen of our craftsman home in Pinecrest Enclave, clutching a mug of coffee like a lifeline, staring at my wife, Elena, who had just walked down the hall in her sweatpants, looking confused but strangely calm. The pounding came again, harder this time, vibrating through the floorboards, followed by a voice that wasn't asking for permission but demanding submission, shouting my name, Marcus Thorne, and ordering me to open the door or face the consequences, a command so loud and arrogant that it shattered the morning peace like a dropped mirror. I remember looking at Elena, her dark hair tied back in a messy bun, her eyes narrowing not with fear, but with a sharp, calculating focus that I'd seen 1,000 times but never truly understood until that moment. I moved to the door, my hands shaking just a little, expecting to see a delivery driver having a bad day or maybe a neighbor with an emergency. But when I cracked it open, leaving the chain locked, my stomach dropped straight through the floor. Standing on my porch, bathed in the pale morning light, were 4 men dressed in what looked like navy blue tactical gear, complete with heavy boots, utility belts, and shirts that had Community Compliance Unit stenciled on the back in aggressive white block letters, looking for all the world like a paramilitary hit squad that had gotten lost on the way to a war zone. And right in front, wearing wraparound sunglasses that looked ridiculous at 6 a.m. and a smirk that made me want to punch him, was Officer Brock. Except, he wasn't really an officer. He was my neighbor from across the street, a guy whose real name was Brendan Vance, though he'd introduced himself as Brock when we moved in, claiming to be the head of neighborhood security, a title he wore like a crown. "Step aside, Marcus," Vance barked, resting his hand on a holster that looked disturbingly real, his voice dripping with that toxic mix of boredom and menace that bad cops in movies use. "We have a code 4 violation and a fugitive harboring situation. Your wife is coming with us for questioning regarding threats to the community." I just stared at him, my brain trying to process the absurdity of a man who borrowed my lawnmower 3 months ago now standing on my porch with a literal goon squad, demanding I hand over my wife like we were living in a totalitarian state. "Questioning," I stammered. "By who?" "The Homeowners Association." Vance didn't like that, his jaw tightening as he leaned in, the cheap polyester of his uniform crinkling. "The Pinecrest Safety Council has broad authority. Marcus, now bring Elena out here or we escalate this." And behind him, his 3 minions shifted, one of them looking nervous, glancing at the curtains of Mrs. Higgins next door, who was definitely watching this unfold. Then Elena was there, slipping under my arm, cool as ice water, looking at Vance like he was a stain on the carpet she couldn't wait to scrub out. "Vance," she said, her voice low, "do you have a warrant signed by a judge?" That stumped him for a second, the legal question hitting him like a physical slap, causing him to blink behind those stupid sunglasses before he recovered his bluster, sneering, "I don't need a piece of paper to keep this street safe from people like you. We know who you are. We know about the classified job. You're a threat." It was insane, absolutely unhinged. But looking back, I realized this was the moment the trap snapped shut, not on us, but on him. See, we had moved to Pinecrest Enclave to escape the noise of the city, seeking a sanctuary where I could work on my architectural drafts, and Elena, who told everyone she was a high-level security consultant, could decompress. For the first year, it was paradise, until we decided to build a privacy fence, a simple, wrought iron thing that was fully permitted by the county, but apparently offended Vance's delicate sensibilities because it blocked his view of our kitchen window. That fence turned a friendly neighbor into a tyrant. It started with passive-aggressive notes about aesthetic cohesion, then escalated to fake fines from a non-existent law firm, and finally, to this, a paramilitary raid on my front porch because his ego couldn't handle a 6-foot barrier. Elena didn't flinch at his threat. She just turned to me, her eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that stopped my heart, and said, "Marcus, call the county marshal's office. Tell them we have armed impersonators attempting a home invasion." Then she looked back at Vance. "And Brendan, you just made the last mistake you'll ever make in freedom." He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. But he backed off when I pulled out my phone, retreating to the street with his squad, shouting that this wasn't over, that we were on the list. But as they walked away into the shadows, I saw Elena watching them, not with fear, but with the predatory stillness of a lioness watching a limping gazelle. We went inside, the adrenaline crashing out of me, leaving my hands trembling as I locked the deadbolt. I turned to her, ready to ask what the hell we were going to do, ready to suggest we sell the house, run away, burn it down, anything to get away from these lunatics. Elena, I breathed. That guy had a gun, a real gun. He's lost his mind. We have to call the police. We have to. She cut me off by walking to the stove and turning on the kettle, the domestic normalcy of the action jarring against the violence of the last 10 minutes. She stood there for a long time, watching the steam rise, her back to me, the silence stretching until it felt like a physical weight in the room. I didn't tell you, she said softly, her voice missing its usual warmth, replaced by a steeliness I didn't recognize. I didn't tell you because I wanted us to be normal. Marcus, I wanted to come home and just be your wife, not the badge. Badge? I asked, confusion clouding my panic. She turned around then, leaning against the counter, and dropped the bombshell that would rewrite our entire history in Pinecrest Enclave. I'm not a security consultant, Marcus. I'm the elected county marshal for this district. I oversee the sheriff's deputies, the tactical teams, all of it. My mouth fell open, my brain trying to reconcile the woman who cried during dog food commercials with the highest law enforcement officer in the county. You're the marshal? Yes, she said, her eyes hard. Brendan Vance isn't just an annoying neighbor, he's a serial impersonator, a predator who uses fake authority to bully people out of their homes so his boss can buy them cheap. And as of this morning, he is my personal case. I watched her, realized that the woman I married was a stranger in the best possible way. And as she pulled a burner phone from a hidden drawer, I knew that Brendan Vance hadn't just poked a bear. He had walked into a dragon's den wearing a suit made of stakes. The siege was over, but the war had just begun. The realization that my wife, Elena, was the county marshal hit me like a physical blow, recontextualizing every moment of our marriage. Her hyper-awareness in restaurants, the way she cleared a room with a glance, the late-night consulting calls that were actually tactical briefings. But there was no time to process the betrayal of omission because Elena was already in motion. She sat at the dining table, her laptop casting a blue glow on her face, transforming her from my loving partner into a tactical commander planning an assault. He doesn't exist, she muttered, tapping furiously, referring to the man we knew as Brock. I ran his prints off a soda can he tossed in our bin last week. His name is Brendan Vance, a washout from the police academy who's been arrested in 3 states for impersonating an officer, fraud, and intimidation. I pulled up a chair, feeling like Watson to her Sherlock. So we arrest him now? He came to our door with a gun, Elena. No, she said, and the coldness in her voice sent a shiver down my spine. If we arrest him now, he pleads down to menacing, gets probation, and moves to another town to do it again. I want the root. Marcus, I want the guy pulling his strings. She turned the screen to me, showing a complex web of shell companies. He's working for Julian Graves, a shady real estate developer who targets veterans and elderly folks, scares them with fake HOA violations and armed security until they sell for pennies on the dollar. It was sick, a predatory scheme disguised as neighborhood watch, and suddenly, the anger I felt wasn't just for us, but for every family Vance had bullied out of their home. Julian Graves flips the houses, Elena explained, and Vance gets a cut. It's organized crime wrapped in suburbia. So how do we catch a ghost? I asked. Elena smiled, a terrifying, beautiful expression. We give him exactly what he wants, a conspiracy. The plan was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Elena knew that Vance's greatest weakness was his paranoia and his desire to be the hero of his own action movie. We started leaving breadcrumbs. Elena planted a classified-looking file in our mailbox, knowing Vance checked it. She staged fake phone calls in the backyard, talking loudly about asset relocation and high-value targets. We even installed hidden cameras in the trees, catching footage of Vance creeping through our bushes like a discount ninja, snapping photos of her staged documents. The bait was a message Elena posted in the neighborhood group chat, using a burner account, warning residents about a covert tactical delivery happening at our house in 48 hours. It was nonsense, absolute gibberish, but to a guy like Vance, it was the smoking gun he needed to prove we were criminals running a black ops site in his precious neighborhood. We watched the live feed from the hidden cameras as Vance paced his living room, talking frantically on the phone, likely to Graves, his agitation growing with every minute. He was hooked, lined, and sinking. "He's going to make a move," Elena whispered, watching the screen as Vance cleaned his gun, a terrifying sight, while muttering to himself. "He's going to try to expose us publicly. He needs an audience to validate his authority." Sure enough, the flyers appeared the next morning. "Emergency safety meeting," they screamed in bold red font. "Immediate action required against the Thorn residents." He had called the entire neighborhood to witness our execution, scheduling it for Saturday afternoon on the lawn directly in front of our house. "Are you worried?" I asked her the night before the showdown, watching her polish her real badge, the gold star gleaming under the kitchen lights. "I'm worried for him," she said, sliding a fresh magazine into her service weapon, not with bravado, but with the heavy resignation of someone who knows violence is coming. "He thinks he's the predator, Marcus. He has no idea he's the bait." Saturday arrived with a sweltering heat that made the air shimmer above the asphalt. The neighbors gathered, a mix of curious onlookers, frightened elderly couples, and the few cronies Vance had managed to radicalize. They set up folding chairs on the sidewalk, a bizarre audience for the destruction of a family. Vance rolled up in his fake patrol car, stepping out like General MacArthur returning to the Philippines, flanked by two new inspectors who looked even sketchier than the last ones. He marched to the center of the lawn, a megaphone in hand, and pointed a finger at our front door. "Ladies and gentlemen of Pinecrest," his voice boomed, distorted by the speaker. "We are harboring dangerous criminals, people who threaten our way of life. Today we take our neighborhood back." Inside the house, Elena stood by the window, wearing a sharp blazer and jeans, looking every inch the authority figure she was. She turned to me. "It's time. Marcus, stay behind me, and if the shooting starts, you drop and you don't move." "Shooting?" I choked out. "Ideally, no," she said, checking her earpiece. "But Brendan Vance is cornered, and cornered animals bite." She opened the front door and stepped out onto the porch, not with a shout, but with a silence so profound it sucked the air out of the street. The crowd went quiet. Vance turned, his smirk faltering for a fraction of a second as he saw her. Not the scared housewife he expected, but a warrior entering the arena. The trap was sprung. The cheese was taken. Now came the snap. The silence on the lawn was heavy, thick with humidity and the impending violence that crackled in the air like static electricity. Elena walked down the porch steps, her boots crunching softly on the gravel, stopping 10 feet from Brendan Vance, effectively ceding the high ground but dominating the space with sheer presence. "Brendan," she said, her voice calm, projecting without a megaphone, cutting through his theatrics. "You're disrupting the peace." Vance laughed, playing to the crowd, gesturing wildly. "Peace? You talk about peace while running a criminal enterprise? I have proof. I have photos." He waved a manila folder, stolen from our mailbox, like a holy relic. "You're arrested, Mrs. Thorne, by the authority of the Pinecrest Safety Council." The crowd murmured, swayed by his confidence. That's when Elena pulled out her phone and tapped the screen. Behind her, on the portable projector screen we had set up in the garage window, ostensibly for movie nights, an image appeared, a receipt. "That," Elena said, pointing to the screen, "is the invoice for the badge you're wearing, purchased from copcostumes.com 3 months ago, shipped to your mother's address in Ohio." Vance froze. The crowd gasped. "And this," she swiped, bringing up a mugshot of Vance looking disheveled and bruised, "is your booking photo from Arizona, where you were convicted of fraud and impersonating a federal agent." "Lies," Vance screamed, sweat beading on his forehead, his composure fracturing like cheap glass. "She's hacking the system. She's the enemy." And finally, Elena continued, relentless, taking a step forward. "This is a recording of you and Julian Grace discussing how to force Mrs. Higgins out of her home by cutting her power line." The audio played, loud and clear over a Bluetooth speaker hidden in the bushes. Vance's voice, unmistakable and cruel, filled the street. The mood of the neighborhood shifted instantly. The fear turned to anger, the neighbors standing up, realizing the monster wasn't in my house. It was standing on the grass with a megaphone. Enough, Vance shrieked. And then, the moment Elena had feared happened. He dropped the megaphone and his hand flew to his hip. Gun, someone screamed. Time seemed to warp, slowing down into a syrup. I saw Vance draw the weapon, a jagged, jerky motion of a man terrified and furious. I saw the barrel coming up, aiming for Elena's chest. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was frozen. But Elena? She was a blur of efficiency. She didn't retreat. She stepped in. Before Vance could fully extend his arm, Elena slapped his wrist aside with her left hand, a sharp crack of skin on skin, while her right hand drove into his elbow. There was a sickening pop, the gun clattered to the grass, and Vance was suddenly spinning, his face meeting the dirt with a force that knocked the wind out of him. In one fluid motion, Elena had her knee on his spine and her own service weapon drawn, leveled at his two cronies who were backing away, hands raised in surrender. "Brendan Vance," she announced, her voice the voice of God. "I am the county marshal. You are under arrest for assault with a deadly weapon, conspiracy, and fraud." Sirens wailed in the distance, the real ones this time. Unmarked SUVs screeched around the corner, Commander Lewis leaping out with a team of actual deputies. They swarmed the lawn, cuffing the accomplices, while Elena zip-tied Vance, who was sobbing into the turf, his empire of lies dissolved into mud. They dragged him away, thrashing and cursing, screaming that Julian Graves would kill us all. But Elena just stood up, dusted off her blazer, and looked at the stunned neighbors. "Folks," she said, her voice softening, "go home. It's safe now." The aftermath was a whirlwind. Julian Graves was picked up at the airport trying to flee to Belize. Vance went away for 15 years. Pinecrest Enclave returned to peace, but it was a different kind of peace, harder, wiser. Elena became the reluctant hero, turning the HOA into a genuine support network, teaching self-defense on weekends. But there was one moment, weeks later, that stays with me. We received a postcard with no return address, just a picture of a generic suburb and the words, "You cut off one head, but the Hydra has many." We were sitting on the porch, watching the sun set over the fence that started it all. I showed Elena the card. She read it, sighed, and took a sip of her wine. "Are we safe?" I asked, the old anxiety scratching at my throat. She looked at me, then at the street where kids were playing, totally oblivious to the darkness that had almost swallowed them. "We're never completely safe, Marcus. There's always another Vance. Always another Graves looking for a victim who won't fight back." She reached over and took my hand, her grip strong, reassuring. "But they know where I live now, and they know I don't miss." It was a happy ending, sure. The bad guys were in jail, the neighborhood was united. But as I watched the shadows stretch across the lawn, I couldn't help but wonder, was Elena right to take the law into her own hands to bait him? Did we provoke a mentally unstable man into pulling a gun in a crowd just to catch a bigger fish? It worked, justice was served. But when I look at the spot on the lawn where the gun fell, I wonder where the line is between protecting your home and becoming the thing you're fighting. What would you have done? Would you have called the cops and hoped for the best, or would you have become the trap? Let me know in the comments.